We'll talk. We'll talk.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Today we're judging the 2018 AIPP SA Northern Territory and Tasmania Awards. This category is sponsored by Fuji, and we'd like to also mention our major competition sponsor, Epson. So thank you very much for Epson and Fuji. We're going to just introduce our judges. So I'm going to actually get them to introduce themselves this morning. So we're going to start off, Melissa.
Hello. Oh, I'm on, yay. My name's Mel Newman. I've been a photographer now for almost 3 decades. I'm South Australian. I shoot still, so I'm a working professional, but I also have a couple of education sites, so you can find out about that at 79togold.com.
Hi, David Evans. I've got a bit of a frog in my throat, so I'll just leave it there.
This is not my mic.
David, what was that? Say it again.
No, I'm South Australia, originally from Sydney. Been a photographer for 20 years, full-time for 10, and pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Hilary Han. I'm from South Australia. I have also been a photographer for about 30 odd years, I forget. I concentrate mainly on wildlife, fine art, those sort of nice things. Yeah, hand you over.
Tony Hewitt. I've been a photographer for 30 years, and I haven't touched a camera in 12 hours. Oh, sorry, wrong meeting. I'm also the current awards chair, APPA chair and awards team manager for national, and background includes 1,000 weddings, a couple of thousand portraits, fine art, landscape, and commercial.
And I'm Clay Glenn, commercial advertising photographer based in South Australia. Last probably 5 years, I've concentrated a little bit less on photography and worked on feature films. Looking forward to today. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, judges. So without further ado, I'll just make sure that we're all set to go back of house. Volunteers, are we? Wonderful. And we'll start judging, and we'll have our first print, please.
a Facebook community where you can actually go in and get critiquing, and you can talk about awards, and you can share upcoming awards and that sort of thing as well. So we're building a really lovely little small community. We've just started. If it wasn't for the fact that I sort of got on the AIPP board, I probably would have promoted it a bit more by now. Jerry Gahonis thankfully gave me the name 79 to Gold when I did an interview with him. And so that's pretty much it. So you can find it at 79togold.com. It's really cheap to join. It's like $27 to join and $7 a month to be part of the community, because it's not about making money. It's about keeping it operating and making sure that everybody is getting better educated on how to use awards to further your photography. So there you go. Now that I've told you that, though, Tony, you have to tell us about it. Oh, are we ready to go now?
No, Tony.
Tony, you're up.
Tell us about your latest project.
How do you write 79 to Gold?
It's 79togold.com. So, and I've got some interviews on there from Hillary and from David, and I'll probably be hitting you up for an interview sometime soon. Tony, thank you.
And I've seen guys cry in the hallway as well.
So it's not just the girls that cry, it's the guys as well. So, yeah.
Tony, tell us about the very, very interesting project that you've just launched in Sydney this week.
Thank you. So for those who aren't aware, last April, about a year ago, actually it goes back a bit further than that. Can I ask a question? How many people know the Australian National Anthem? And what's the one word that really bugs the crap out of you? Gert. So as a kid, I always wondered what it meant. And I think I grew up with, and having my kids grow up asking what it meant. So I had this burning desire to understand what Gert meant, combined with the growing up with a dad who's a pilot and having spent 10 years now as a fine art aerial photographer. I was sitting with a friend of mine who does a lot of work with a camera company, which doesn't sponsor this, so probably not fair to say at this point. No, I should really. Well, so he worked with Canon. And he was sitting with me having a cup of coffee. We did a few workshops together, and somehow it come up about, dream things and what's crazy ideas. And I said, well, the biggest idea I've had is, I reckon the biggest job or the biggest project anyone could ever take on would be to do an aerial photography trip around Australia in a Cessna. But that's not going to happen because it's just logistically, out there. And he's the sort of guy who he's a retiree who had an Order of Australia and worked in corporate and sort of didn't have can it be done, but how? Tell me when you're ready. Anyway, so he went away, come back and said, I think we can get this sponsored if you want to do it. So we had a Cessna I'd used with a pilot many times, a little 210, and we put a fair bit of fuel into it and flew out from Perth, crossed the coast, turned left and kept going and kept Australia on the left for a month. We crossed Bass Strait, went round to Tasmania as well because it's part of Australia apparently. And how they changed the thinking of people and of the culture, because suddenly we had this image of us as one. And having done what I did and what we did as a team, I have a completely different perspective on Australia, which I choose to try and share with everybody else. And the exhibition doesn't have one photographer's name, it has two, because every image we both captured a version of, so we sort of went that way. I did all the finishing work on the images because that's my strengths. Logistics and planning of hotels and things were done by Dennis. Two pilots, there's a whole story and all of that. So the exhibition will come to most capital cities, that's the plan. And I look forward to sharing it with not just the general public, but particularly with my photography family, because it's the sort of thing that any photographer would have given their whatever to do. And I was just lucky and blessed that I was the one who got the opportunity to do it. So the images don't have titles. They don't have, when you go there, it's just numbered. It's just, you don't, but this really cool app that goes with it. When you go, you download the app. You use facial recognition software is built into the app to hold it at the picture. You click on it, it shows you the picture, the GPS coordinates, so you can find out exactly where it is, and it takes you straight to Google Earth if you want to see roughly where it was. And you can buy prints. So, yeah. So that's what Gert by Sea was about. So I kind of kicked that one now. I know what it means. Really know what it means. I've touched a cloud flying along off the Northern Territory and seeing the bottom of clouds where you get that flat bottom, and saying to my pilot, I wonder what a cloud feels like, because I reckon a lot of kids would think like that. To be honest, most of this trip I was like a kid in a candy shop. And he said, well, let's find out. So he put the left wing into the plane and the right wing was in blue sky. It was surreal. It was like just this puffy cloud. And as we flew through, I had my hand out the window. And just that moment when we touched it, you could feel the coldness. So there's a lot of surrealness. I journaled it. There's a book will come that I'll write about that story. But it was just an old-fashioned adventure. And we didn't go out to photograph places. We went out to explore the coast of Australia and to come back and share how it felt, if that makes sense. So there you go. There's a lot more to it, but that's probably the short version. So
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tony. Hilary, I'm going to hit you up about your recent trip. Tell us all about that. How did you go?
My recent trip was the recent one to Vancouver or the one before to Kenya? Kenya, okay. I took a small group of first-time safari goers to Kenya in August. And it's the first time I've gone on a trip with people who I didn't really know well enough on, taking them out. It was quite a confronting, challenging experience, I have to say. And photographically wise, it was less than rewarding. We had fairly bad weather. We had hail in the Mara. We had everything thrown at us. But seeing people's first reaction to seeing their first wildlife is just the most rewarding thing you can imagine. And one of them, we were in a place and we saw a zebra. It was kilometres away. It was a grey patch on a far hill. And we spent 30 minutes trying to get photos of this with his tiny little camera. And I kept saying, we will see them closer. But he was so excited. And it just reminds you, because you can be doing this for a long time and go, give me something amazing. I don't want to just see an animal standing there just doing stuff. I want amazing stuff. I want amazing light. I want amazing everything. And it was a good reminder that the wild, doesn't matter which continent you're in, the wild is continually rewarding and just the most wonderful thing that you could imagine. If you've never gone wild anywhere, you've just got to do it. And so I have plans to do some other trips with people, but it will probably be on invitation only type of basis, because it's pretty traumatic, I have to say.
Thank you, Hilary. David, you've had some experiences as well in the travel department. What was your latest frosty adventure?
Well, actually, I've just come back from Norway, which was the opposite of a winter Scandinavian experience. So we went for the midnight sun. So up in northern Norway, we started at the Lofoten Islands, and then we went north. So we went right up over the North Cape. The sun never sets. At midnight, it just hangs above the horizon, and you get very long periods of, sunrise, sunset kind of light. Small group, and we did a lot of other interesting things. We went on a king crab catching trip and went and caught some massive crabs and ate them. There's crab pots. Yeah. We don't jump in the water and actually catch them. They've got big pincers as well as, they're huge. I mean, I could only manage 5 legs to eat on one crab. Like, I couldn't even finish, it was great. Sleeping is a challenge, though. You got to, wear eye masks and all sorts of stuff because it's just light all the time and it kind of screws with your melatonin levels, I think. But it was great. It's a great trip. And, very different to the usual depth of winter trip I would do to that part of the world.
Wonderful. So, Clayton, what have you been working on lately? What's your...
Oh, well, as I say, my sort of field has digressed a little bit from the last sort of 20, 30 years. Most recent sort of project, I'm really concentrating on feature films, and my last feature I shot in June last year it was. And, my role in it is I write it, produce it and direct it and sort of raise the funding, which, you think, what's that got to do with photography? but I tell you, when you're directing, the 20, 30 years of photography skills are enormously valuable, because you're trying to make every shot an award-winning shot if you can. You know, the reality is that it's not that easy. And certainly, you know, I think that's, you know, what I love about coming to do the judging is the opportunity to see work, to have a fresh look at what's contemporary, you know, what people's perspective is on that they're shooting from a abstract to a commercial sense. And, you know, for me, for someone who's trying to specialise more in directing, it's incredibly valuable to see people's perspective on photography, because a vision shot starts with a stationary position, and then from there you try and move and make it a more dynamic shot. You know, I think from if I'm boring you, I'm happy to move on, but we're down on.
Why did you go into film? What dragged you? What took you to film from photography?
Look, it was really as much as anything, it was more a commercial decision, in the sense of, as much as I love photography and you know, had been very good to me and enjoyed it. The problem I found with photography was that you would, especially in a commercial sense, you'd get commissioned, you'd do a shot, you'd do a campaign, and basically that's it, and it's finished. And I know there are some, you know, options for some royalties, but that's assuming it gets used more and more. And I guess what I was looking for was something that you could put your heart and soul into, which is what, you know, you do with your photography, but there is an option to earn continual royalties from the film. And that's certainly, you know, I was looking for an opportunity to have a recurring income. And what I also quickly found was that I love the writing and I love the directing. The producing's not so much fun, but I think, you know, just if we seem to be a bit short on, we still haven't got the system quite back up yet, but just my last film, interesting in that because I was producing it, you rely on multiple sources for funding, and we got to the point where we had some contracting issues, and we were, but we were also on a deadline to make it come together. So you get down a path where you've committed so much money to it and so much time that you just think, hopefully all these things will come over the line and you can go ahead. And and then it gets to a point where you've so committed to it that you've got no choice but to go down the path and go through it. And I clearly remember on the first week of the shoot, and I was trying to direct this scene out on, it was down in Torrensville, kids walking along the street and whatnot. And I got this phone call, and it was from our major funding source. And I said, look, there's a technical hitch with one of the contracting, and you're not going to get your money. And it was pretty scary, yeah, because I was sort of looking at like, oh my God, if this falls over now, I'm going to lose $500,000, you know, plus. And so it's scary working with such big budgets, and it can go sort of horribly wrong, but it equally is incredibly rewarding, and it does, you know, come through.
Can I ask him another question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tony.
So, having just done a big collaborative project myself, did you find it difficult to go from the world of a photographer, where often you just look after yourself, even though you took on a lot of the parts, you then suddenly to pull off these big projects, you are in a team. It is a collaborative approach. Did you find you had to compromise at any point in what your total vision was to satisfy other stakeholders?
Yeah, sort of interesting question, because you know, even though the budgets on the features are relatively, you know, they're big in photography terms. You know, we're talking, you know, 1.2 million. It's a very small amount for, you know, a feature film. And the harsh reality is, when you're on a lower budget, you're making compromises all day, every day, because of, you know, you just don't have enough time to shoot. You can't, shoot everything as you'd like to shoot it. So I think working as a team, there are compromises, but I think the bigger compromise is that you can't do everything as well as you would like to be able to do it. And I think what is amazing about working for a team, especially when you get a team together who is very committed to the same vision and objectives, it's such a buzz. I mean, they're like enormously long days, but so rewarding. It's fantastic.
So can you step back now from those sort of projects, and I'm saying that from personal experience, having seen this idea that started as a kid, came through, then 2 years of planning, execution, sitting on it for a year and not being able to tell anybody, which is a pain, and then seeing it come to fruition and be concrete. It took me a little bit of time, but now when I look at the project I've just done with a group of people, I look at it and it's like I don't see the things that I wanted to have. I just see what's in front of me and I'm happy. Do you find you can get to that space?
I think so. Yeah. I think so. I mean, what you end up putting up on the screen is really rewarding, and I think listening to everyone's experience they're all so vastly different, but in a way they're very similar in that you're striving to something that you want to achieve out of it, and you perhaps seen a niche or seen a need or whatever quite the motivation is. And I think it's for me, not from coming from a stills photography background and not coming from a film background, to see your film up on in 100+ cinemas and kids loving it, it's unbelievably rewarding.
What's the film called?
The last one was called Going for Gold. And the film before that was called Raising the Bar, and the film before that was Second Chance. Look, they all have for me, they've ended up having a similar theme, but it's because it's been successful. And, when you're selling to an international market and it's successful and they keep throwing quite a lot of money at you to make another one, you come back and make another one.
Well, wouldn't you? Because, like you alluded to, that all the different things that people do. And I suppose there'll be people in the audience that start out as, they pick up a camera and they like taking pictures and expressing themselves through their imagery and through the way they see things. And then you find, David's off in Norway because of the midnight sun, or Hillary's gone off to Africa, and she's chasing elephants and things like that. And, Mel, with you, you've gone another path where you want to help other people realise their vision through competition and challenging. What advice would you give to people who are starting out, who can see a big project out in the distance, but then they see the first few steps that you've got, in the first few steps can be almost insurmountable? What is something you might be able to share that can help them get to that vision down the end where they're doing something which at the beginning was like almost impossible?
I think I need your help on this one. This one now. That sounds like a good psychological question if that's what you're studying.
What would be your approach then, Mel?
Well, you don't get it done if you don't start.
Good question.
So you have to actually just find some way to actually take that first step. Once you get that first step moving, then you tend to get momentum, and that's pretty much how you then get started.
So then, Clayton's talked about the long hours, and the fact that you're driven by the passion to compete and everybody's into it. And once they're all committed and aligned, people put in the hours. But how important, David, is it to, I feel like Jeffrey Robinson, how important, David, is it when you're out there and I know what it's like shooting in that midnight sun, you don't want to go to sleep. But at one level of your brain, you're knowing if I don't get some sleep, I'm not going to get through 3 weeks or 2 weeks. How do you discipline yourself, or how do you plan around that to make sure you can get the most out of every minute but still look after yourself so you can keep going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not really hugely disciplined, I think, but I think that probably brings me to a point about being quite resilient with travel, actually, and just finding that you have to sometimes remind yourself that the headache that you've got, or the fact that you're tired or whatever, doesn't matter in the big scheme of things, and you've got an opportunity because you're there at that moment, and you just got to push on and try and keep a smile on your face. I don't know if that answers the question, but
sort of does. But Hillary's just come back with some interesting experiences of working with people, taking them on a tour. How do you handle, or how do you find that challenge, Hillary? You're there as a photographer to take photos. You're there as a tour guide to take them to the right places. But you're also there. You got to deal with man management, people management. You've got to help them get, because they're not thinking of, I need sleep. They're thinking of, wow, look at this light. It's amazing. We're going to go forever. But you're also conscious of, hey, you won't last 4 days if you keep going like this. How do you approach that?
Well, this last trip was a little bit different in that only one was a serious photographer, one was semi-serious, and one took an iPhone, just to give you an idea. So that was probably the biggest challenge, getting the one with the iPhone to get photos to bring home, despite having told her she needed a camera. She said, no, my phone will be fine. So that was a challenge. But the sleep thing wasn't too difficult because I just said, this is when we go to sleep. I can be a bit bossy. And you will be up, before the sun's up, and then we will be gone. And if you're not ready, you get left behind. I think you need to make simple rules on those, because otherwise someone else misses out if people are a bit, slack about it. The biggest difficulty with that trip, things like water, drinking water. And that's hard if people don't habitually drink water, because dehydration is such a real thing. But keeping a group together and focused, it was pretty hard. Little things like you're in areas where they're very poor people, and you have to say, well, this is the way, there are cultural things that you have to try and teach them. Australians can be really, really bloody-minded about their attitude to different cultures, and we did have some situations where we were in the middle of a bit of a fracas because someone just wouldn't follow simple, respectful rules. That I find that hard because I get angry, because to me that's the biggest insult, travelling to someone else's country and just ignoring what they think is the way to behave. So it was a challenge. Those type of things, travelling is a challenge. It wouldn't matter where you go, I think. Just trying to keep them all happy and together.
What about fatigue, like Mel, when people are trying to put their ward prints together, or, David, you're trying to encourage them to come out there and do things. What role does fatigue play in the ability to see good pictures, to, look at something and get it right, rather than come home and go, I was so tired, I missed that?
Yeah, it is fairly important. I think, coming back to your original question, now I understand it a bit better. I think the whole managing a group and managing fatigue and managing health of everyone in the group is actually largely two things. It's largely an attitude thing, and it's also, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So, but it is very important to keep everyone healthy, keep everyone safe, but also just keep everyone in good spirits. And I find that the attitude, if you have a positive attitude as the tour leader, for example, it will rub off on everyone, and that's really important. And you can push through to a certain degree, tiredness and so on, but then after that you need to take care of the group and yourself and so on. And sometimes it's a juggling act, but I see that as a management thing, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes. You get to read people much more easily. People come to you with issues, and sometimes people don't, but it's about knowing that they have issues anyway, and managing the personalities in a group, and there's all sorts of things, but you don't really think about it consciously half the time if you've been doing it a while, I suppose. And I actually learned, you also have, you learn that stuff from other people as well. Like, I've got to say, I learned a lot of how to manage a tour group from Tom Putt, who, just does it with the best attitude I've ever seen. So, I think looking to others and how they do it is a really good way of learning that. If you want to do that sort of thing and you're daunted by it, sort of, having people who already do it teach you that sort of thing is really good.
So Mel, maybe just expand on the relationship between fatigue, confidence, and great shots. Getting good images, because at the end of the day, it's all about the photography.
Yeah, it is. And there's a very big difference too between burnout and fatigue. So you can actually just be shooting a lot of the same stuff and get just tired and run down and that sort of thing. So looking after yourself and making sure you're keeping yourself healthy is really important. But you've also got to work on your relationship with photography as a whole. That's where the burnout comes from. So if you're shooting for other people only, and you're not really engaging your own creativity, then you can suffer burnout. And I think any photographer that's been in the industry for more than 10, 15 years gets to a point where one day they wake up and they go, I don't want to pick up a camera today. I'm tired of it. I'm exhausted. And you actually have to work on it like you would any relationship. You've got to find a way to come back and really fall back in love with photography. And I know I've been through that a couple of years ago. I had to really work on it hard to bring myself back to a point where I felt that I was feeling good about my work again. So yeah, fatigue and burnout can be a big issue, but it's all about how you handle it and the things that you do to make sure that you look after your relationship with photography.
So Clayton, come back to you.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Okay.
Well, I'm fascinated to hear some technical stuff about the photography that you did. What cameras were you shooting on, and what? So just talk us through what the.
Okay, so some background statistics. We flew for 168 hours. We did 31 days with a 3-day maintenance stop in the middle because the planes need a 100-hour maintenance overhaul. We had a 1-day lay day in Darwin, which was scheduled in case we had a weather delay, but we never got the delay, so we just had the day off. I shot entirely with 35mm cameras because the sponsor required us to use their cameras. So we used Canon 5DSR and 5D Mark IV and a range of lenses. I tend to shoot with standard lenses, 50s and 85s, with a 7200 on a camera, just in case. But generally I'll get the plane to move up and down. The lowest height was 500 feet because that's the legal limit that you can go down to. The highest was 8,000. We saw a whirlpool just off Darwin with blue and brown water, which was 4 kilometres across. And in order to get that and get the perspective we needed, we flew up to 8,000 feet, which took us 10, 15 minutes to get there. When we flew across Bass Strait, we had to take a life raft, which when you've already got a plane full of luggage, camera gear, 2 guys, a pilot, and it's only a Cessna, and you've got to pull a full-size life raft that's a 4-man life raft in there as well. We had AIPPs and things like that. We did SARS, which means every time we took off, there was a takeoff time. The pilot on the ground, so the 2 pilots waxed, the pilot on the ground would carry SARS, so that when we landed, if we weren't in contact and phoned him within 15 minutes, he would send out search and rescue. And that's all the way round. What else did we do? I used Google Earth. So beforehand, we pre-planned, apart from logistics of accommodation, fuel, etc. What happened was I started out by saying, okay, we got Australia, and then we started looking at Google Earth. So I sat there for night after night, going through Google Earth at very high magnification, picking out potential locations, not because that's exactly what we would shoot, but the pilot needed waypoints to put in a flight plan. We knew that once we were up there, weather conditions, lighting, everything would change and evolve organically. But we had this plan. And then when we took off, I had my phone mounted next to the dashboard, constantly running Google Earth. So even when you're out of signal, it can cache and run. You just can't zoom as much. But you could see roughly where we were on the map, because looking from above, you can tell, but you can't tell. And we could see what was coming. We had little plans that I've used with pilots, and Paul possibly does the same, Paul Holland there, where the pilot would tell us, okay, we've got a 2-hour flight coming up from A to B. So the way he would have planned it was it's 2 hours if he flew there, it's 3 hours with a photographer in the left seat, because he knows it's going to be about a plus 50% contingency for us to do orbits. We didn't have the luxury of looking at places and saying, oh, this will be great at sunset, and we're there at 10 in the morning. We're shooting down on something that's beautiful and it's midday. I mean, it's not the best time to be shooting, the light's coming back. But the purpose of the journey was to experience an odyssey and to record it record it photographically, or more of a visual poetry. So it wasn't about this is what it looks like in its best light. It's like this is what we found. So there's sections of the southern Victorian coast where we took off in heavy cloud and couldn't see anything except lightning off the wingtips, and we had to get somewhere because there was another front coming through. So the photography was very limited. And there's other days it was just perfect. there was parts of the coast when I Google Earthed it that I thought this would be magnificent clear water, and we were 2 weeks after the massive cyclone last year. So all Ballina and all of that New South Wales Queensland border was just chocolate brown coming out into the ocean, which had its own beauty. So the overall picture we've got of Australia is all the many facets of this beautiful jewel that we call Australia. Irrespective of culture, creed, colour, race, genre, age, we're all in this one place. And the pictures we've got is that when you look at a diamond and you see the light giving you all the different colours, that's what we see. And if you turned it and turned the light, all those colours would shift around. So many of the images that you look at, people think, oh, that looks like Queensland, and it'll be Tasmania. Or that looks like WA, and it's New South Wales. So it didn't really matter. The other thing that it's an obvious thing, but it's not something you think consciously of. With 100 images, it's like, well, how should we split this up? And somebody said, what about you should be sort of looking after the states equally? But WA is 36% of the Australian coastline. 36%. Queensland's about 18, I think. Northern Territory's about 11 or something. And Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania and South Australia together don't match up to the same amount of coastline as WA. So it's not a bias, but there is a reflection on the coastline that is not decided by states. It wasn't about being parochial, it wasn't about which state, it was just this coastline. The other thing
so just an update, guys. We actually have the main AIPP awards server is down, and they're working on the technicalities in the background. We might have a little bit of a wait, but I'm more than happy. This is absolute gold, guys. So if you want to keep on chatting, I'm all for it. But if you need a little bit of a break and have a coffee as well, you're more than welcome to.
The other thing that kind of was something I learnt over this journey was that as kids we grew up as people, we look at a map and we look at it and we go, that's the coast, and we know it's not a line, but you kind of just default to that. And having completed this journey, Australia's coast is a breathing, organic thing. It goes in and out. It breathes in and out like a lung. The top of the country, you've got 8-metre tides. So you've got, on one particular point of the day, the water could be 3 kilometres inland and then it goes out. So the images aren't just water and a beach. It's salt flats and salt areas and river patterns and trees and colours of water in the water. So the technical side of it was, 2 pilots have to do about 4 days each because CASA requirements are they can only fly for a certain number of hours.
Because I was going to ask you about that. How did you juggle the movement between the pilots?
They just flew ahead to the next city. So they would go. We'd be at an airport. They get a cab to the nearest domestic airport where they can get on a jet and fly to where we had to be. So we did a swap in, say, Latrobe Valley, and then not Latrobe. Where did we do it? We did one just south of Adelaide, just at the top of the lakes. What would that be? Near the entrance to the Murray. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I've got so many towns in my head. And then so we did a swap there, and that pilot took us, and we had 3 or 4 nights. Took us down to, we stayed near, we stayed at a little place, give them a free plug, in along the coast, southern coast, near the 12 Apostles. Starts with W. Warrnambool. And there's a little place there called Gert by Sea. So that was a no-brainer. We stayed there. But that pilot took us from this coast area just south of Adelaide, down through there, across Bass Strait, around Tasmania. We stayed in Strahan. We stayed on Flinders Island. That's a very cool place to stay, by the way. The smallest pub with the smallest cars. You could imagine us in this little tiny thing with 3 seats, but anyway. And then came back up to Port Phillip Bay. We came into Port Phillip Bay, got the Pope's Eye, and then came back out of there into Latrobe Valley and ended up at Malakuta, and we swapped over there. So we did these swaps. And the pilots were just, sometimes it was near a major airport, and sometimes they'd hire a car and have to drive 2 hours to find us. The changes in the north, we did a maintenance in Cairns and did a pilot swap in Innisfail, and that pilot took us pretty much all the way around the Gulf of Carpentaria, and we swapped up near Gove. So we stayed in Burketown, which is, there's places around Australia where you'd land and we'd call a taxi, the only taxi in town. They come out to the little shed that we're standing next to. You get in the taxi, take you to the hotel or the pub, both. He'd say, just go through there and you can check in. So you'd go around the corner and walk in the door. The same guy would be standing at the counter. Welcome to the such and such hotel. I'll take you to your room. So he'd check us into the 4 rooms that were there. And then they would turn around and he'd say, when you're ready, the restaurant's over there. So then you go around to the restaurant to order. Same guys at the bar. What would you like to eat? It was really cool. So that was Australia. But yeah, basically you got to take enough cameras so you're not going to fail. We had inverters in the plane to charge batteries on the go. We had with the interesting thing when you see the project online, it looks like a map of Australia, and it's actually the track log that was recorded by the plane's instrumentation, the exact track log. So you can see where we went in and out. And I've actually got it's a GPX, or I forget the file format, that I can bring up in the right software and zoom in and in and in and see every orbit we did around the entire country, wherever we detoured or whatever.
So I'm just trying to picture.
Well, you want to film me doing it again? Shall we do a film?
Yeah. I'm just trying to picture. I mean, just describe to me practically how you're taking these shots. Is the camera mounted or is it?
No camera mounts, no filters, no hoods. So I didn't use polarizers. In fact, we unpacked the boxes on the morning we took off.
Okay, right.
Okay, so
that's good
literally-
pre-testing.
literally unpacked the cameras and the boxes and took off. We left-hand side of the plane, so you have to have pilots who are qualified to fly right seat. So they're generally instructors, or they both were. And when you're shooting, the basics of aerial photography, you're not sticking, the lens can't go outside the window because of the slipstream. We've got windows up, not shooting through perspex, but we didn't need doors off. The pilots are good enough and worked with us enough to be able to drop the wings. And I would be having my camera over my forearm and using my left hand to tell the pilot the orientation of the plane. So as we're flying along, I would be sort of seeing something and I would be saying it's at 10 o'clock and 45 degrees down. So he knew it was 10 o'clock and it's down there and he can't see it, but he would start to come in and I would say, yeah, hold your line, hold your line, hold your line, hold your line and bring it around now. Wing down, wing down, wing down. So he would tip, and then he would say, oh, that's what you want. So I'd say, hold that distance. He'd bring it around. He would then be calculating for wind drift, because some places you come into and it blows you across too quick. So that was part of their job. And the other part of their job was to keep us safe. So we had an arrangement right from the beginning that I always set up with a pilot. I'm going to ask for everything. I'm going to ask for the world, ask for the moon. You give me everything you can give me, but keep me safe. And when I've asked for too much, just say no. I won't take offence. So on occasions you'd be flying, I'd say more, tip more, tip more, tip more, tip more. Every now and then you'd hear beep, which is a stall warning sign in a plane. And our pilots were very calm and cool. They would just say, when you're finished, I'd like to keep flying because we're actually falling now, we're not flying. And the plane would slowly be dropping out of the sky. So it's the plane becomes an intrinsic part of the capture and the relationship between the pilot and you calling the shot. The ability to see it ahead of us, Google Earth planning, see it out of the windscreen, watch the weather, the light, the clouds, pick the line of attack, because over that whole journey, 168 hours, if we had to redo every orbit at least once, all the ones, it would have added immense time. We would have lost shots because we had to get to a point. We can't do any more orbiting. We've got to get straight to the next spot because of fuel. Some places we would, to the limit of our fuel capacity to get there. You couldn't stuff around. But yeah, it's
So did I understand it correct that 2 of you were shooting?
so two cameramen, 2 photographers.
And so
it
was
two
that
of us.
hard to juggle if trying to? I mean, my recollection of shooting on a Cessna was sort of one window opens and
We had a second window in the back. We had
good
built-
luck with everyone else. So
Well, we had a window like custom made using Cessnas. There's a way they can put a window in the back with a little drop down porthole. So you see it a lot of dedicated tour planes that are used for photography where he could drop it down. So Dennis was able to sit in the back and pull that down. So I was pretty much directing the shots, and then we'd both shoot. And then as we go around, if I'd say I'm clear, and then the pilot will wait, and Dennis will say I'm clear. So maybe he goes first, or have you got enough, Dennis? Yeah, I'm good. Or I don't want this one, or I want it. And it was just that, chemistry in that environment, like on a tour, so important, but it's magnified immensely because you're in a very small plane in the air for 31 days. You're together, and yeah, you got to get on.
So, was there a conscious effort to shoot different focal lengths between the two of you, or anything like
We
that?
just both shot what we wanted to shoot. So the exhibition, in editing the exhibition, was a case of, okay, you bring your favourites and I'll bring mine, and there was a fair chunk of images that were the same, experience. So we would just basically, we'll use yours there and we'll use mine here, and and then I stylised everything to match.
So I guess the test would now, if you bring up an image, can you tell where it's actually from, or is that
I tell you what,
this is just too many
I know
similar?
those pictures. Well, it's like you looking at a piece of footage in a film. You would know it intimately, where it fits, etc., because you've gone backwards and forwards in the editing. So I edited in the cut down. I edited the files. I've edited the pixels. I prepared them for print. I flew to Sydney a few times. I printed at Sun Studios, and Selena was a fantastic printer. Interpreted the way we wanted her to interpret what we presented her with. So, colour correction if we needed, sharpness, etc. What was the question? I'm just making sure we don't.
No, that's okay. We've just found out that the server in Singapore is down.
Singapore.
Yeah.
So it's not this room. It's not Australia. It's Singapore.
Yeah. So
I reckon this will end up with Trump just stop the internet. Yeah. What was your question? Because I had an answer to it.
If you'd know, if I showed you one of your images, would you
so
know?
walking around the exhibition was really interesting because people, as I said, the software's there to find it. But walking around, I could look at it, and it wasn't so much I knew where it was, but I could go back to the intrinsic emotion and feeling of what we felt as we saw it coming up, what I was looking at, what I'm thinking, I've got to get this, what it's going to look like. And that process in your brain as photographers, which we all have, where we see something, we start to go forward. I'm going to print it this big. I'm going to do this with it. It should be on gloss paper or matte paper. I can't wait to frame it, etc. So the images are very strong triggers because I've just so intimately involved, and probably because we've had to sit on it for over a year in an embargo and just not say anything. No social media, nothing. So
What was the reason for that?
just the sponsor, they wanted to launch. It's a big project. There's some other plans around it, and they needed to all be put in place. There's a lot of editing, when it's not just pick 100 quick pictures. There was a lot of getting that prepared, and preparation of other things and outcomes such as books and things like that, and get it right so that we could launch it the right way. So, but yeah, it's hard to sit on a project. You know that, Clayton.
No, we're always looking for advanced publicity. So we're keen
Well,
to-
I'm sure that there would have been
promote it.
advantages to that, but there's also many people that I'd like to surprise. There's a lot of my associates and people out there that would have been interested in it, and we weren't ready to answer the questions. And it's kind of nice to just sort of say, "Hey, bang, there it is. That's what we did." Yeah, looking forward to coming to Melbourne, and we were talking before about having your initial vision is perfection, and I know you're a perfectionist, but having to deal. Well, I think we all are. We see it perfectly. We know exactly what it should look like, and then we start to water that down a little bit. And what I found interesting was the confidence levels of this isn't what I wanted it to look like. This isn't I wanted those pictures, but because we need some, overall vision, we have to go with that one, and that good one's going to stay out. But then when you do get to the final piece, I'm sure when you've sat and looked at your movies, and you can really step back and get away from all the things that you could have done different. For me, when I look at what we could have done different, is now sort of dissipated, and I just look at what we did, and think, wow, and it really is like I had a young kid at one of the talks we gave recently, like yesterday, or the day before, and he said, is this yours, or how do you feel about that your name's not on there on your own? And I said, I look at that picture, and that picture's there because somebody got behind the project. My wife and kids let me disappear for a month. A pilot, and we had, as I said, one of our pilots was a Top Gun instructor. He's Air Force, 37,000 hours, Hercules, F-18s. Crazy guy, great guy. But these pilots that had so much skill and commitment to the project that we could forget about that. So all of that contributed to that image on the wall. And as much as, yes, as photographers we do like to say that's mine, it is, but it's also ours. You know, we've all contributed to that, so we should all share in the enjoyment. Yeah, well, that was part of the goal. Is to, you know, I'm getting older, apparently, and I'd like to leave a few things behind. Yeah, so I'm proud of that one. I think there's a good one I can do. Enough of me. There must be somebody else with something interesting to talk about.
Maybe Paul Holland.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, jump on up.
You're a pretty avid explorer, and didn't you just come back from doing some aerials over Central America?
Central America.
As in Utah and places like that?
Yeah. I
Arizona,
just
Death Valley?
I had a bit of a amazing. I had a big international wedding in Solvang in California, and I used that as the platform to build the rest of the trip around, which I often do, trying to make the most of where I get going and do all sorts of different things. So I accidentally bumped into an American guy in the car park in my house about 2 months ago, who I overheard an American voice, and I was like, no one lives here who's American, so sort of went up and said g'day, and I said, I'm going to America, and I'm doing this, I want to do some aerial stuff, and he's like, I know this guy in America who's a microlight pilot, you should hook up with him. And 2 days later, I had 4 days of microlight photography set up in Monument Valley and Canyon Lands at Utah and Arizona, and it was on.
So you did all that in microlight?
I did 2 phases of the trip. I had the wedding in the middle. I had the first 4 days or week in with the microlight photography in Utah or Arizona, which almost didn't happen. In fact, I just flown 40 hours. I got up to do an 8-hour drive from Vegas up to meet him to do an evening flight that night. Had a tiny window. He had a Nat Geo photographer before me. He had a Russian guy, Stas Bartinka, straight after me. Another Nat Geo guy after that. So this little tiny window. And he, just as I got in the car, rang up and said, we've had an accident and somebody opened the hangar door and shredded the wing. And I'm currently in Monument Valley with no car and a skateboard. And I can't get anywhere or do anything, and I need all the specialist material. So stop. And I spent a day and a half ringing up every upholstery store and parachuting store in basically Western USA trying to find material. And I drove 8 hours to get a special tape. He got some friends to drive another 8.5 hours to get some other material. We've got a local sewing machine operator who worked in the restaurant to meet us at the hangar.
Went up in this thing?
And we stay up all night for about 7 hours with 8 of us just trying to figure out how to fix this wing. And we had all sorts of problems. We had the wrong thread. The sewing machine wasn't catching. It slipped through. We made mistakes. We were running out of material. We had one last bit left to pull it off. And we just stuck some glue on it. Went to bed about 2:30. Got up at 4. And he said, I'll just do the test flight on my own. I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. And he came down smiling, and it was on. But we lost a day and a half, so I literally only had a few hours with him. And very, very, very luckily for me, the Russian guy missed his flight. And I had another day, and we did a huge, epic 4-hour, 210-mile flight all the way through Valley of the Gods and Canyon Lands and Fry's Canyon and the Needles and all these places. He said he's never actually done a flight that long with 2 people. And I've never felt more like an eagle in my life. Like in a microlight, you can literally go in any direction and shoot with 16 mil and do whatever you want, up, down, left, right, and sideways. And it just turns on a dime. It's actually the most beautiful vehicle I've ever been in to shoot out of. It was amazing.
So
that was phase 1.
Every one of us that go up and shoot this sort of and do jobs, whether it be in the air or whatever, you come back from the trip and someone will say, what was your favourite picture? And I mean, for instance, the state awards were sponsored by Epson, of course, and Epson, every state has their signature worthy print. So here, will there be 3, like Tasmania?
That's correct, yes.
So there's 3 signature worthy prints. So, you've got the guys from Epson. I think Bruce does that.
Is here,
Bruce Williams, yep. So Bruce from Epson has to pick an image that sort of for him sums it up. So in terms of an Epson signature worthy award or something like that they do, when you do your trip, what would be this image that in your mind from your trip that was your signature worthy, your Epson signature worthy image from that trip?
Well, it's debatable whether it's signature worthy, but I have one image that completely stands out to me that sums up the whole trip. And it's actually relative to the second half of my trip, which was Death Valley. And I spent 2.5 months trying to find a plane and a pilot and just got nowhere. It's a very difficult place to fly. It's full of military zones and massive restrictions and very, very remote, tiny airports. And I got close a couple of times and nowhere. And I finally ended up getting a 63 Cessna with a 79-year-old retired military pilot who was very precious about his plane and thought maybe he could, and we literally rocked up at his doorstep, and he was 79 and he could hardly walk, and I thought, well, the buddy that I was flying with just said, oh, I'm not going with this guy, I'm not doing it. And I was like, well, he doesn't need to be able to walk to be able to fly, so I'll take first up.
This is a Walter Mitty story.
And and it was pretty touch and go. And first of all, we got here, he just put his finger up like this, and there was no wind, and he just said, "Not flying, boys." And I was like, "Oh, there's no wind." I was like, "You said too windy." I was like, "There's no wind." I was like, "What's going on? What's it going to be like this the whole time?" It's like, then my buddy's like, "I told you, man." And I was like, "No, I'll stay with it." And sure enough, we took the day off, and 2 hours later, it was blowing its socks off, and it was out of control, and it would have been dangerous. So he just put up his finger, and he just knew. This guy had 57 years flying experience, and he'd built and designed planes for the Air Force for 45 years. He was absolute legend of a guy. But cultural differences, I'm pretty sure he's a full-on Trump supporter. He had a fleet of guns, the size of thing, and I ended up sleeping in his RV.
Sidewinder missiles on his Cessna.
Well, he actually, funny enough, he told me of a friend who was in a Cessna who they shot a Sidewinder at to take down because he accidentally drifted into one of the military zones, and they literally shot a Sidewinder at him. And he dived down low enough below radar that it just missed him. That was one of his stories. And one flight, we had 15 F-18s, F-32s, whatever else's, and a B-2 bomber above us, like, while we were shooting. It's full-on military zone. It's crazy. And I literally got shots where I was taking landscapes where, like, oh, there's an F-18 Hornet down in my shot, like, down below, like, underneath me, and I'm not even that high. So it was fascinating. But coming back to the image, there's this one image on the very, very last day, and really this guy was so amazing, he just became an extension of me. Like, I was literally out the window shooting, not even looking at him, just using tiny little hand movements, and he knew exactly what to do by the end of the flying. It was just, as you know, when you get that relationship and that symbiotic nature, and they really get an understanding of what you're doing and why you're there, it's a beautiful thing. And he was such a gifted pilot, and I think, he was kind of enjoying having something to do. It was a bit different. And there's this one image that my friend Taylor got, and Taylor's an amazing photographer. He actually shoots for Nat Geo. He's a bit of a legend, and he's a very, very good friend of mine. And he just took one picture in the morning, and I didn't know he took it. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning on the last morning, and we'd convinced old Shell. And we were meant to shoot the night before. We were like, this guy's 80, we can't ask him to shoot late and get up early, even though we wanted to. We were like, nah, let's take the evening off. But we got up at 3, got to the hangar about 3:30, and there's this one shot of the two of us just using a torch, pouring over maps, trying to map out this area that none of us knew particularly well, trying to come up with a plan. And it just has this, and you can see like the old Cessna in the background, and you got that sense of focus and creativity and excitement and possibility. It's just sort of floating in the air around this image, and it really has a beautiful, deep sort of narrative about the different generations between us, the level of experience and the skill that comes through, and the age of his plane that's seen so much, and the focus in the moment of really intense sort of possibility just in the air, and it was one of the most beautiful flights of my life straight afterwards. So it's very, very telling, evocative narrative, I guess. So rather than the creative perfection of what I was looking for in the shots, it had the deepest probably meaning and narrative of the whole process to me.
Thanks, Paul. Hilary, your trip to Africa, you've taken a few shots of animals along the way, and you've done a reasonable job at it, I have to say. One of the world's best. What would be one of your signature, Epson signature-worthy type images from your trips, and one of the more recent ones?
Not just necessarily from the... I'll move this. Not necessarily from the latest trip, just one. That's a hard thing. That's really hard.
It's a really hard question.
That is really hard. I did win one of the Epson signature prints a couple of... What? Think what? What? My hippo. No, that wouldn't be it. A couple of years ago. But the things that when I'm shooting, because I consider myself an artist, so obviously I bring the images back, and I don't tend to just leave them as a straight image. That's not what fires me at all. But I'm looking for the spirit of the animals. I'm trying to make stories within what I saw. So the ones that spring to mind are little cameos, I guess, into the life of an animal that may not be so obvious if you were just travelling around. And there's some with people in, but usually it's animals. There's one that I did a few years ago with 2 little cheetah cubs that that I don't think even made it to APA because it was out of time. But we'd followed a cheetah with her 4 little cubs for days, as in we caught up with her in the morning and left her alone for a while and caught up with her again and followed her life for quite a few days, and just watching the cubs playing and exploring. And so this is an image of the 2 little cubs exploring this log, and you have to stay with them for a long time just to feel like you can feel their spirit and how they interact with their environment. And I guess that's what I look for in my images. So that's a really hard one, because I've had some trips where I could pull maybe 20 images from and go, oh, I'm so happy with these. And there's other trips like the one just last year where it was a struggle. It was a struggle to the real struggle if you're taking people out is that you have to look after them, and they're new to safari. They want to see everything, and they don't want to stop and stay with animals, and that's a compromise you make, and I'm fine with that. But it's hard to just say yes. Well, let's just stay a little longer, but they, and quite rightly they don't want to, because they need to see everything that they can possibly see. So that was a hard thing. I came back with very few images that I fell in love with, and the ones that I did, and I won't talk too much about them because there's 2 that I've entered, and there will be judges
pick
listening.
Something else.
Yeah, I'll pick something else. So
let me rephrase the question a little to help.
Yeah.
How important is the experience around capturing the image to the value that the image has on you over time?
Oh, it's everything. It's absolutely everything. And I didn't understand that because I was raised in East Africa. That's why I go back. And the first few trips I went back was all about going, oh, my God, I'm back, and isn't it wonderful? And I was like every tourist. I took tourist photos, and occasionally out of that I would get something I could use. But it wasn't until I changed my mindset and started saying I don't need to take photos of everything and just experience it. So the one that I have of cheetahs with its cubs that got a gold at APA a few years ago sitting on a mound, that was another experience. That was just like, you can't describe to people the worth of just sticking with an animal. So we were with her for probably 4 hours. My son was there on a work experience trip in the Mara, and I spent a week with him. So we stayed with her without anyone about, and we just followed her for maybe 3 hours until we broke for breakfast and went and found a tree a couple of kilometres away, and we were just sitting on the grass, and a few minutes later we looked up, and she had actually turned up at the same tree but just was standing off 100 metres. Like, it was just one of those relationships you go, it was just meant to be. And the photos, I got quite a few. Obviously I only put one in because of the same subject rule, and APA, it's not all about APA, but at the time that was the one I processed. But it was watching her hunt, watching interact with her cubs, watching her resting whilst they played and climbed trees. And you come home and it's like doing a family portrait, because you're invested in those animals rather than just, oh my God, we've seen this amazing thing, we got an amazing photo, and we move on. And so I try and do that more and more, which makes it hard. You have to do those things on your own. So when I start doing my trips, it's more about, if I do a week with a group, I spend a week by myself, and then I can look after what I need to do and look after them. So that's why it's more based on invitation or application now, because I need people to understand that I want them to understand a bit more about that's what makes me have a rich experience, and will make them ultimately have a really rich experience, is knowing where to go and when to sit and wait. Looks like Mark's got good news.
Unfortunately not. We're rustling up some spreadsheets because we need to get rolling soon, but I suggest
Take a little break.
have a break, 10 minutes, stretch your legs, grab a coffee, go to the loo, and God willing, we'll be up and running soon.
Thanks everyone for listening.